This is Single Status.
Welcome everyone to Single Status Podcast. We are here with Fanneli, Robles. Wait, did I say that right? I know we just went over that.
You said it perfect.
Robles. Okay, guys, we were having a lot of technical difficulties, and I am just so thankful for Fanneli because I am just, Anyway, thank you, Jesus, for helping us through this.
Yes, thank you, Lord.
Yes, but I am so excited to have Fanneli here because she is an author, a mother, a wife, and influencer. And we've been following each other on TikTok and Instagram for a while, and I just love your content so much. And I read your book, Anxious to Wed, which was so good. So I want to start with first your bio that you sent me. And normally I don't read bios, but I think it's just a great way to start the conversation. And so your bio, Fanneli Robles, was born in Orange County, California in 1986. After suffering a panic attack that derailed her life, she was inspired to write. Anxious to Wed is her first novel. And so there's so much there, guys, and I'm so excited because when you read a good book, you don't really get to talk to the author about it, but now I get to talk to the author. So guys, you have to go buy this book. It's just so good, especially if you're single, if you, went through a breakup, or it's just and I wish I had my book with me right now, which I have a hard copy, but I actually gave it to my friend who's just went through a breakup in her early 30s. So anyway, I was like, you need to read this, girl. But anyway, I'll stop talking and tell us your story. Tell us, about that whole journey. Please start wherever you want.
Well, I was mentioning to you earlier, it's been 10 years now, and today would be my 9-year wedding anniversary if I had stayed with my ex-fiance.
Wow.
And when I made the appointment with you to have this chat today, I wasn't paying attention. I didn't realize it until this morning that I saw that. I called my bestie and I was like, oh my God, girl, today was supposed to be my 9-year wedding anniversary. And it's crazy to think how not only am I not married to that man, I'm married to somebody completely different, but at the time, 10 years ago when I was calling off my engagement, it felt like the end of my life. And it was the end of my life. I'm living a life so different from what that was. I had to let go of that person, that life, that experience to be here now.
Yeah. So how old were you then when you called off the engagement?
I was young. Now I look back, I felt, what's crazy is I felt super old at the time. I was 27. Okay. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I was a baby. And I was so worried at the time that I would never meet someone. And what's crazy now is I feel like there is so much more grace that women give themselves. And that's even one of the reasons I aged up the character in my book, Anxious to Wed. I aged her up to 33 because I feel like now there is more grace that women have for themselves and for each other, surrounding being an older, an older bride, so to speak. Yeah. And being single, well into your 30s. But at the time at 27, I really felt like my life was ending. I was like, I'm going to die a spinster. Like everybody and at the time it felt like everybody I knew was already married or engaged, or at the very least in a serious relationship. I'm like, I'm going to end up alone. I don't know anybody else who's single. There's no more single men left.
Right.
And it was just a crazy time because 27 is so young. I can't even imagine now. I can't even imagine now.
Yeah, it is so young. And I identify with that or relate to that because I remember being in a relationship throughout my 20s, and it was I was 25 and I felt like I was on this major timeline, 26, 27, 28. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting older. And it's us women, we have this timetable or this ticking clock. And if we aren't able to see that that's not really we don't need to be stressed about that. It's God's timing. Like that can just drive us crazy. But I want to go back to when you were in that relationship. So how long were you with your ex?
I was with him for 6.5 years. We were together for 6.5 years, and he had moved into my apartment after like a year or two. I'm trying to remember because it's been a long time ago, girl. He had moved into my apartment, and what's funny is like when he moved in, it was like real slowly but surely. Like he'd be staying over a couple nights a week, and then suddenly he was just never going home, but also not paying any rent. So just leeching off of me. So it was a crazy experience, and I was so young and so in love, and he was older than me. I allowed it, and these are all things that, when you're in it and you love someone, you allow things to happen in a relationship that, you would not, I would say as an older adult, like I would have never allowed that to happen to me. I would never allow that to happen to a friend, but at the time it seemed, it seemed reasonable. It seemed fine.
Yeah, and you talk about on social media how you were kind of doing everything. I think you talk about like cooking, and you were like you said you were paying the bills. Yeah, talk a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was bringing home the bacon, cooking it, and then cleaning up after. I graduated college before he did. And again, he was 6 years older than me. So at the time I met him, I was 21. He was already 27.
Okay.
So I graduated college before he did. He moved into my apartment. I was doing all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the grocery shopping. Like on my days off, like I would spend my time doing these things, like to the point that this is so embarrassing. But I'm going to tell you, like legitimately would be darning his socks. I don't even know if you know what that means. It's like the sock gets a little hole in it and you sew it up. Like I really so badly wanted to be wifey. Like I'm doing all his laundry, folding it all up. And if I noticed like a little hole in his sock, I would darn his socks. Like doing the most. I can't even tell you how extra I was and like trying to, honestly, like I feel like I thought so badly that I wanted him to be my husband. I wanted to show him like, look what an amazing wife that I can be. So I was always doing the most. And I feel like he was always doing the least because it's like it wasn't a priority to him. Like he wanted me to be a good wife, but he didn't want to be a good husband. I mean, he didn't bother to propose for 5 years that we were together. So this whole time I'm doing everything, begging this man for his love and affection, trying to prove myself. And yeah, he didn't propose for 5 years. And I felt like even when he did propose, I feel like there's this expression online that you see all the time now, the shut up ring. It's when a man doesn't really want to marry you, but he gives you the shut up ring. And I feel like that's what it was. It was just like, I feel like we had come to a point in our relationship where it's like, if you don't propose, like, again, like I thought I was so old, which is so dumb. But at the time I was like, if you don't propose, like I got to move on because, my biological clock is ticking, and I think that's a message that women get, that your biological clock is ticking. And we think, oh my gosh, after I hit a certain age, I expire. The eggs expire. There's all these crazy stats like, your risk of, having children with, different health conditions and problems, like, doubles. It's like the studies, if you look at them, I think it was for autism in particular, it's like the percentage, sure, it doubles. It goes from like 1% to like 2%. But I think most people can accept that doubling as a risk. And I think that research like that and language like that has been really fear-mongering for women.
Yes.
And so we have been like squeezed into a biological, like again, a biological clock, our biological clock is ticking. And so we're squeezed into this position again of trying to conform to what we think would be an ideal wife so that someone will ask us to marry them. And in this case, it was, my ex-fiance who, again, I was doing everything to appease him. And in the end, it's like I realized I don't even want to be married to you. I was obsessed with the idea of marriage for the sake of being married, and I didn't even realize it at the time.
And what you just said, I was obsessed with the idea of marriage without even realizing it. And so many of us go through that. I know I'm guilty of that. And I just listened to this podcast about how we sometimes fall in love with the idea of someone. And it's like we fall in love with this vision. This could be in dating, or this could be with your actual like boyfriend or girlfriend. or even your spouse, like in marriage, but we fall in love with this like fictitious idea of this person and how we want them to act and what we want them to do and the life we want to have. And a lot of times it doesn't like align with reality. It's just kind of like a human thing. I know I'm guilty of that. And it's interesting that you said that, because I think a lot of us kind of just obsess over this one thing, like marriage, when in reality, the relationship could be completely not working. And how the shut up ring, that is so interesting, because that, yeah, like we don't want a shut up ring. We want someone to choose us and want to be married to us. Like, we don't want to beg. I'm done begging. Like, no, I'm not begging for a man to, propose or to want to be with me. Like, we shouldn't have to beg for that.
I think a lot of it, unfortunately, is like validation seeking, and I think as women, it's so easy to kind of fall into this pit of desiring. I don't want to say like, being a pick-me, because I've never been that cool. I've never been the cool girl who's agreeable to everything. I've always been kind of awkward, but to an extent, like being a pick-me in the sense that, I wanted to feel chosen. I wanted to feel like, somebody wants to marry me. Somebody wants to be with me the rest of their life. Again, seeking validation. And I was seeking validation in this case in my ex-fiance, in that partner, thinking, okay, once he proposes, I'm going to feel complete. Once he proposes, I'm going to feel like somebody wants me for the rest of their life. I'm going to feel happiness. I'm going to feel peace. When he actually proposed, I didn't feel any of those things. When he actually proposed, I felt scared. And I think it was the realization that like all of these things I had worked up in my mind, like, okay, this is what I've been waiting for, right? Like, this man is finally validating that our relationship is worth something. He wants to be with me the rest of his life. All of this, like this seeking that I felt when he actually proposed, I felt no resolve. I felt more scared than before, because I'm like, okay, now it's real. Now it's actually going to happen. And I think that's when the wheels in my head really started turning, and I started growing fearful. But the thing is, like, I was already in so deep, we lived together. It felt like, I felt like I couldn't get out, I felt like all the wheels were already set in motion. Like, again, we already lived together. He's already proposed. We had set a date, and I felt like, I was in too deep. And it literally took a panic attack for me to end the engagement, because I was delusional. Honestly, I was in disbelief that what I thought I wanted for so long wasn't actually at the core what I needed.
Yes, and I think that it's interesting because I think when you enter into a relationship so young and it's so serious, and you're kind of that like puppy love, and you haven't really experienced life yet. Like, I don't know, that's when I got in my really serious relationship that I was in my 20s too. I was only like 21, and you kind of just ignore everything at that age, and you just fall in love, and that's what you care about. And I think as you get older and you start maturing, you start becoming more independent, you start kind of understanding yourself more. And I think they say your brain doesn't fully develop until you're like 25.
Yeah, you're literally your frontal lobe.
Right. But like, do you think that had anything to do with it too, where you're 27, you thought you wanted this so bad for the past how many years, and then finally when you have it, you're like, oh wait, is this really what I want?
I think it's definitely maturing. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's, like you said, that your frontal lobe doesn't even develop until you're 25. So I feel like at that point, there was definitely a long period of time before I actually broke off the relationship. Even before I proposed, there was already like a recognition of all the red flags, right? A recognition of, is this really the man that I want to be with for the rest of my life? Not just as my husband, but like the future father to my children. Is this who I actually want to be around with and creating a life with. And so again, like there was red flags, but I was still breezing past them because at that point I felt like, yeah, I'm in too deep. I don't know anyone else who's single. I'm of marriage age. I guess this is what you're supposed to be doing. And I think part of that too for me was I didn't really have my own family, like anyone with a good track record of what marriage should look like,
Hmm.
right? So my own parents divorced. Um, now my aunts and uncles, most of them are divorced. My mom's side, then I just felt like that was kind of the thing. I kind of believe that marriage is just picking somebody and you make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And that I just expected it to be work for the rest of my life. I didn't have like a healthy expectation of what marriage should be. And again, I already felt like I'm in so deep, I might as well commit. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until like, yeah, he proposed and I started like, it became a reality that I started having a lot of feelings of anxiety. And at the time, I didn't even like know that's what it was, right? I would have difficulty sleeping at night. I would have like cycling thoughts in my head. Like when I would shower, anytime I had like quiet time in my brain, it was never quiet time. It was always filled with a cycle of thoughts of honestly like fear and dread.
Yeah.
fear and
Wow.
dread. And I hadn't experienced that ever before. So I didn't even realize that it was anxiety. I mean, even when I had a panic attack, I didn't know that panic attacks were real. I didn't know that was a real thing. I literally was driving to church on a Wednesday for Bible study and I was praying about it. And that wasn't the first time I prayed about it. Girl, I prayed about it a bunch. I
Wow.
was like, Lord, if there's another man, give me a sign. And he would give me signs all the time. It was like nonstop. Every time I would pray about it, God would just give me a sign. It'd be like, a song on the radio. Like, I mean, I can't even explain to you. I think one of the funniest ones, and I still remember because it was so specific. I'm working out. I'm on like on a treadmill, and like on the treadmills they have like those little TV monitors, like very limited programming.
Mm-hmm.
And I was praying about it as I'm on this treadmill. I'm like, Lord, if this is not the man that you have for me, give me a sign so that I know. I kid you not. The next thing that was on, it was like a prank show. The next prank was a runaway bride. Like literally in a wedding dress, like on the subway, like running away. And I was like, that
Wow.
feels oddly specific. But
Yes.
again, like even though God kept giving me signs, I kept ignoring them. So I was like, no, like I kept chalking it up
Yeah.
to like weird coincidence. No, that's fine. Like I couldn't really be you, Lord. And it wasn't until I was in the car on my way to church and I asked God, like, if this isn't your will, like if this is not the man for me, Lord, I need you to give me a really big sign so I know what, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is you and your will for my life. Panic attack, like that. I couldn't
Wow.
breathe. My hands started tingling. My hands locked into crab claw shapes. I literally had them like gripped on the steering wheel and I could not remove my hands from the wheel. Like I wanted to like call 911 because I thought I was having a heart attack because this had never happened to me before. And I remember like panicking because I was like, how am I going to dial the phone? I can't dial the phone like this. And, in that moment, I'm like, I'm praying, I'm asking Lord, like, what should I do? And I have the idea of like, use the Bluetooth. So I smack the Bluetooth on my, my wheel configuration. And, I call 911 and, ambulance comes, fire truck comes. And I remember when like the EMT had me on the side of the road and he's like, oh, you just had a panic attack. I didn't believe him. I thought he was a kook.
Wow.
I was like, there's no way that's not a real thing. I was in just like shock and disbelief because I didn't want to believe, yeah, that God was giving me the sign. And that's how clear it had to be. That's how, like, I don't say that God is angry, right? But like, I feel like God was like, you want a sign. You don't want to doubt it anymore. I'm going to really shake you up.
Wow. Wow. And it kind of reminds me of the Bruce Almighty, the movie. Do you remember the scene where he's in the car and he's screaming like, God, give me a sign, give me a sign. And God is giving him all these stop signs and like road closure and all these like red lights. And it is a great movie if you haven't
I
seen
have
Bruce
not
Almighty.
seen that.
It's really good. You should watch it. It's really funny. But it totally, you're so right. Because we typically know deep down.
Yeah.
We know, like, God is speaking to us deep down. It's that still small voice. Or there are, like, clear signs, but sometimes we're just not ready to move forward. And and to really follow and align ourselves with God's will. And it's really hard. It takes a lot of courage. So if you could kind of go into like, so you went through this panic attack, you're getting these signs from God, then how did you work up the courage to actually go through with it? Because it's really hard. Like it's so easy to, talk about now when we're healed, when we move on, we're, in different
So
relationships.
removed.
Yeah, but like in that time, it is very scary to move on from a really serious relationship, to leave someone you love. Like this is still your friend, this is still someone you care about. Anyway, so how did you build up the courage to actually move forward?
It was just, I think the realization, right, that so in my real life, so again, like my book does mirror my experience. So, I wrote about it. I the EMT hopped in my car and he actually drove me to like the next exit, which I don't even know if he's legally allowed to do. I remember telling my editor about that, and she's like, "That would never happen." I'm like, "I'm not just making it up, though. Like, actually happened to me." My editor was like, "You should like revise the section." I'm like, "But no, that's actually real life, so I know that that's what would happen because it happened to me." So he hopped in my car, he drove me over to the next exit, and then as I was sitting in my car, like hysterical, I didn't want to call him, right? Like, and that's what you would think. Like, if this is someone who's going to be your husband, and you've just had this, to me, it felt like a near death experience. At the time, I didn't really know what was happening. I thought I was dying. So, in this near death experience, my thought was not to call him. It was, I need to call my mom. I need to call my mom. And a fear and a dread of having to talk to him. And that's when I realized, like, I can't move on. I can't move forward anymore. Because if like my gut reaction is to cling to my mother, and I'm terrified to call my fiance, like there is a disconnect. How could I possibly marry this man? And so it was really hard. It was really hard, but I felt like I had no choice. I felt like God had spoken to me so clearly. Sorry.
No, girl, go ahead. It's deep.
But I felt like God had spoken to me so clearly. And I knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So like literally, like I got home, I can't even explain to you, like I didn't even want him to be around. I mean, he ended up coming and meeting us, my mom and I, and my mom was like, "Oh, why don't you just drive back with him?" And I was like, "I can't. I don't want to be in the car with him. I can't do it." I'm like, I'll drive myself home. And we got home, and at the time, I brushed it off. I was like, "Oh, it's because I need my car. I need to get my car back home." It wasn't about the car. I just didn't want to be in the car with him. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts. And when we got back home, he was kind of a jerk to me. I had, to me, one of the most traumatizing experiences of my life, because I legitimately believed I was dying. I thought, how lucky am I that I was able to, get to the shoulder, that I didn't, die right then and there on the freeway. And I felt like I was an annoyance to him because he had to go out of his way to come find me. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I didn't at that point tell him like, "Oh, I'm calling off our engagement," but I was like, I need a break. I have to step back because I'm like, something is not right. Like I need to step back from this relationship. I feel like I can't move on at this point. And he didn't like believe me. At this point, we've been together for so long, like he didn't believe that I was serious about ending the relationship. And I think that's why he let me kind of dissolve it as quickly and easily as he did. I think he legitimately did not believe that I was actually leaving him, that it was the end of our relationship.
Wow. Well, it's so real, and it's understandable to have tears and emotions even years later. Like breakups are so hard, especially when you've been with someone for so long, and then like the darkness of that time and what you've gone through because you had to live it, and so it takes a lot of courage and strength to finally get the courage to move forward, and it's interesting because I was going to ask, what his reaction was, because typically, I mean, I'm not surprised if he, that finally when you were like, okay, I'm ready to move on, that then he was kind of stopping in his tracks, like, wait, what? because, you know, sometimes people don't really appreciate something until it's really gone. And I think that's a lesson for us. Like, we need to appreciate what we have in the moment. And because if we don't, like, why wouldn't you want to, you know, move forward? And so, yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And so then you finally like move on from the relationship, and then did you go right into writing? And just I do want to mention, we didn't mention that this is a fiction book.
Yeah.
But it is based off your true story, but you altered some things throughout it.
Yeah,
but even,
I mean, I wish.
Go ahead.
I wish that like my life was as, you know, because I mean, here's the thing: when you write a narrative, it's like you want it to have a beginning, middle, and end.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not how real life is, right? Like, so a lot of it is again taken from my personal experiences and mirrors some of the real interactions that I had. But I mean, it wasn't so clean, easy peasy, 1, 2, 3, and now everything is great, right? Like, it was out of order in the sense that like there was, you know, absolutely highs and lows that when you're again writing a narrative don't necessarily make sense in the context of a novel. But that's how life is. Life is not like a nice clean narrative. It's
right.
It's up and down, it's messy, it's heartbreaking.
Yes, life is hard, and that's why I don't know how people do it out here without Jesus, because I don't know, I would be in a ditch somewhere. I mean, how do you wake up without God? And my heart goes out to anyone that does have to wake up without God, because it's like that's the only reason I can get out of bed in the morning, especially in those hard times, like breakups or, you know, those dark hours of our life. So then, did you start writing like right after the breakup, or like
No.
what did that journey look like? So you now are single at 27, 28. And so tell us about that.
I was a hot mess for years. I had a lot of like growing and pain to really sort through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really what it boils down to. I had a lot of growing to go through, because I had to question myself, like, how did I allow myself to be in a relationship with a man, again, who didn't care enough about me, right? How did I allow that to happen for so long? So there was a lot of like deep personal growth that I had to do to heal and learn and like really decide what it was that I wanted for my future in a husband, in a partner. Because that's the thing, it's like marriage is a lifelong commitment. I don't think it's anything to be taken lightly. And I think that even I was taking it too lightly. You know, I wanted to get married because I saw everyone else getting married.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was getting too old. I'm running out of time. Like, again, I was so silly. But, you know, I think that's the enemy. I think it's the enemy who gives us this false idea, this false narrative that if you're not doing everything on this very specific timeline that you wrote for yourself when you were in, you know, junior high, that you're failing. You know, when I was a kid, I thought, oh, for sure I'll be married. I'll have a house. I'll have, you know, a couple of kids by the time I'm 25. So when at 27, I'm calling off my engagement, it's like, I'm back to the starting line. Like, not only did I not hit the goals I had set for myself in junior high, but like I'm worse off, you know, way worse off than I had expected. So it took me a long time to really learn and grow. And I feel like that's one of the most common questions that I get on my own social media from people who are like, oh, I had a similar experience, or, oh, I'm going through this right now too. You know, how long did it take for you to meet your husband? And I laugh about it a little bit, because it's like, we can't help ourselves, right? When you're going through a breakup and you're feeling so lonely, you think, I really want to meet somebody else right away. And so I think the reason that women ask me that is because they think to themselves, I don't want to spend years waiting to meet the right man.
Yeah.
But it does take those years, because there is so much healing that you have to do after a serious breakup, so much self-reflection, that you can't really rush into it. I mean, I feel like now, you know, I met my husband 3 years. I mean, I'm saying something. I was almost 30 when I met him, and I needed all that time in between. I couldn't have met him any sooner. If I had met him any sooner, I would not have been in a position to recognize him as being the right man, because I had so much internal work to do.
What you said about about when you finally, broke up and now you're starting back at square one, and you were going through the questioning of why would I let someone treat me like that? That is so real. I really resonate with that. And I think it's a really great question for anyone that is listening that went through a breakup, that was in a relationship where maybe you weren't treated right. Is like, why did I let someone treat me like that? And it it's a really good question because there's always something deeper. Whether it's from our childhood, whether it was how we were raised, what we were taught, maybe it's from a trauma that we went through and we have like abandonment issues from that, or we have something where we, whatever it may be, there's always like a deeper root, especially if we're in a relationship where we really are being treated not well. And we kind of tolerate it. So I wanted to say, like, that's a really good reflection question. And did you find anything like in that healing period of I guess when you were reflecting on that, like, how did it change how you were approaching dating when you did meet your husband? Like, I guess we can move on to that. Like, did you set different boundaries, or was there something that you said, okay, like, this is how I'm going to approach dating in the future, I'm not going to tolerate this, or without being too rigid, I guess, how did you approach things differently after that?
Well, when I first was single, when I first started dating, I just, again, like, did not take the time to self-reflect enough. I feel like I jumped right into dating kind of stupidly. And
which a lot of people do that. It's nothing,
yeah,
it's normal human reaction to heartbreak is we want connection. We
fill
want to
that
be with
void,
someone
connection.
right away. Right.
No, absolutely. And I felt like that's exactly it. I was looking for connection to fill the void that I felt of like loneliness, right? Because again, you grow so accustomed to being with somebody for so many years.
Yeah.
And now I'm sleeping in a bed alone again, after I hadn't done that literally in years.
Yeah.
And I think I got swept up in the romance of the first man who showed me any interest. And again, I was so lonely. I wanted to believe everything he was telling me, and it was just a fantasy. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I felt like I was falling into the same traps again because I was so eager to be in love again. Mm-hmm. So eager to be with someone and again, like, fill that void of loneliness. And when that didn't work out, that's when I started to really do the deeper work that I was dreading doing. That was when I really took time to like self-reflect. Okay, like, what happened in my own, like you said, what happened in my own childhood? Why do I feel the way that I do? Why am I seeking validation in somebody else? And what is it that I really want in a partner, in a husband? And this is going to sound really, I don't know if it's cheesy or woo-woo, but I actually took the time to like write out a list. Like, I literally had like a sheet of paper that I wrote on, and I wrote out a list of all the qualities I wanted in a husband. I was like, okay, like, let's get serious about that, Fanneli. Like, what do you really want in a man? Like, in a partner who's going to be, again, your spouse and the father of your children. What things are actually really important or not negotiable? And so I put like together a list. I can't remember how many items there were, but it was very specific on this list. And I put it in my drawer. I put it in my drawer, and I really didn't think too much of it. But then, like, that was like, it became the measuring stick for like every man that I dated after that. I'm like, is this man hitting all the bullet points that I wrote? And I felt like these were like non-negotiable items. You know what I mean? I wanted someone who was going to be intellectual and kind. Most importantly, God-fearing. That was at the top of my list because my ex had not been. And he would make fun of me for wanting to go to church. And he was really discouraging me from going. And the more that I went, the more that I realized I needed to get away from this man. So I feel like the Lord was using that time with him to pull me away from my ex-fiance, and then again from like these other bad relationships. It's like, because that was the top of the list. Like, it needs to be someone who fears the Lord, because that's gonna be important to me in a husband, and it's gonna be important to me for someone who's gonna be the father of my children. And so when I had like, again, like this measuring stick to hold men up to, it was easier to not get as sucked in.
Yeah.
Right? It was easier to not fall into the pit of trying to just make it work with whoever I was with. Like, to the point that when I met my husband, I don't want to say I had my guard up, but I was kind of at a point where I was like, I don't care if I meet, I don't care if I meet somebody today. Like, I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I was like, Lord, I've kind of given up. I'm going to leave this in your hands. Whatever you want to do with me, like, I'm just going to surrender to your will, and I'm just going to do it. So when I met my husband, I met him at a friend's wedding. I was not looking. I mean, like, he was, I feel like he was making an effort to get to know me. And I was like, yeah, nice to meet you. I gave him a business card because at the time I was selling insurance. And so I was like, if you need auto insurance, you can call me. But like, I wasn't thinking of him at all, like, really in a romantic sense, because my head wasn't there. And I think because of that, when I actually did get a chance to like know him and meet him, like, my guard was down. I was kind of able to kind of meet him where he was and recognize that he was meeting all of the criteria that I had written down on my little piece of paper. The only thing he doesn't have, that I had asked for, because again, I was very specific. The bottom of my list was like, scattered freckles. I've always been like a freckle loving kind of gal. My husband is tall, dark, and handsome, so freckles are not he doesn't have them. But I mean, like, that's a level of specificity that I had on this list. I think I digressed. Oh my God. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. And I mean, we wanted to hear how you met your husband anyway. And I think that going back to what you said about, you jumped right back into dating and then you kind of just fell for like the first person that was giving you attention. I would caution anyone who just got out of a serious relationship, a divorce, or whatever it is. There's always like that rebound person that
yes,
if you're jumping right back in. And I mean, I'm guilty of it. And it's like the first person that kind of gives you attention, you kind of just fall into this kind of
fantasy
situation. Yes. And looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally just fell for something that completely was just not good for me. It was worse even than like the relationship I was in before. And it was a huge wake-up call for me, that I was like, okay, we got to pump the brakes, girl. But I would just caution anyone, like, when you're jumping right back into dating and you fall for like the first person, that sometimes that can be a little dangerous, I guess, because it's like, 100%. Are they really meeting the needs that you need, or is it just to fill a void? Yeah. So, but thank you so much for like sharing your story. And I love the story of how you met your husband when you were in a place of, okay, you've had like 2 or 3 years to heal, to reflect on what you want, reflect on what you need, reflect on what you're looking for. And I love that so much. And so as far as writing, like when you were writing, I was like, wow, you're a really good writer. And I just loved how you write. I love the book. So anyone listening, you have to go buy this book. We'll put the link below, Anxious to Wed. It's just a really like a fun read, but also it like touched my soul. Like as I was reading it, I was like cuddled up and and I was like, oh, like it's just nice for like single people, I think. And even if you're not single, it's just a good book. But like for anyone listening that has a desire on their heart of something they know they're being called by God to do, like maybe write or start a company or get a new job, or I don't know, just like a passion, start a podcast. Like how did you get how did you step out on faith and write your book?
I felt like God kept telling me to do it. Yeah. And I had an interest. I mean, I've always been a passionate reader, like since like the 4th grade. I used to smuggle books out of my teacher's classroom because I loved reading so much. And so I've always been like an avid reader, and I had the desire in my heart to write a book, but I could just never sit down and write anything. Like I would write, a couple pages, but nothing ever really came to fruition. And it wasn't until I had already met my husband. I think I was in a place where, again, I felt healed. I felt at peace, that I started really hearing the Lord, like, tell me, write this book, share this story. And that was the motivation. I just felt like, and here's the thing is, it was a hard book to write. a really painful book to write because, again, I feel like I put myself on blast. And, you know, I've had oh, girl.
Go ahead. This is real stuff, you know, and you went through a hard time.
And, you know, I've obviously like had family and friends who've read my book, and and for sure there's some really cringy elements, some really embarrassing elements, because I really went through it. You know, I think like we all do. We, you know, when you're going through a breakup, and maybe, I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, I had it better than some people. I had it worse than some people. But it was really embarrassing to an extent to put myself out there. But I finally felt like, yeah, I was at a place where I could do it. I had the capacity. And I felt like God put on my heart to share my story because there's so many women who go through a similar experience.
Yes.
And I don't think there's enough stories. There's not enough stories about single women that are empowering.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to write something. It's like, yeah, I've been you. I see you. I feel you. Like I want you to see and feel my story so you can know you're not out there on your own. Because I felt alone. I felt alone in my experience. Like the whole time that I was single, I felt so alone. I'm like, nobody else is going through what I'm going through. Nobody else feels this low. Nobody else feels like giving up, which I know now is silly, right? Because like now that I've been online, I've been sharing my story. I've had, you know, people telling me they read my book and they're like, oh, wow, I went through something so similar. Or they tell me they feel seen. It's like, this is why God called me to do it.
Yeah.
Because there's just not enough stories about women going through that struggle of not meeting societal expectations and having a happy ending that wasn't necessarily a man. So even like, I felt like for me, and not to, you know, give everything away, but I didn't want a happy ending just to be like a Hallmark movie. Do you know what I mean? That's not what I was looking for. I feel like there has to be more stories about women who create happiness in their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like that's what we should be seeking first, the Lord first, you know, and then finding peace within ourselves before we can commit to anybody else.
Yes, and I didn't want to give away the ending either, but like the ending, I personally loved how it ended. So again, whoever's reading or whoever's listening, you have to read it. And like anyone who's going through a hard time, a breakup, maybe you're having a really hard time moving on from your last relationship, because it takes a while. Like it takes a while to heal, to move on. And you heard Fanneli, like you're not alone. Like there are so many other women that have gone through the same situation, and this timeline that we have ourselves on, if we just really, and it's not just a one-time thing, you know, it's a daily, hour by hour thing. Just continue to surrender that timeline over to God and just know that he has it all planned out and he works in mysterious ways. And a lot of times these breakups or these, you know, situations, these heartbreaking situations, it's actually God protecting us.
Absolutely.
You know, and like you said, I don't know if you said it on the recording or before we talked, but you know, if you didn't go through with that time, you could have ended up divorced by the time you were 30, you know? And so, and sometimes we just have to push forward to the direction that God is guiding us, because that is always the best path to be on, wherever God wants us to be. So I am just really inspired by you and by your courage. And again, anyone listening that's going through it, just know like you're very courageous if you stepped out from a relationship that you know was not God's best for you, and that you really like moved forward and worked on yourself, and maybe you are working on yourself and you are moving forward right now. Like I just want to say that that is really inspiring, and know that you are so strong, and you're not alone, and you're doing the right thing.
It's a leap of faith. I mean, that's really what it is. I feel like, yeah, choosing yourself, choosing the Lord first, and then, you know, choosing to work on yourself. It's a leap of faith, right? Because it's so easy. And I feel like, you know, for me, the enemy was constantly in my ear. The enemy was constantly in my ear, like, you're going to be alone forever. You're never going to meet anyone. You know, you know, everyone else is going to move on without you. You're never going to have children. All the things that you have a desire for, you're never going to have. I felt like I constantly had the enemy in my ear and making me want to make concessions, right? I think that's why I still dated the wrong guys, was because I was listening to the enemy, and I was like, well, I'd rather be married to someone than no one. I'd rather have children, even out of wedlock, just to have children. I mean, these were things that I had to be battling against constantly. I was constantly in prayer, and I really had to surrender. I really had to surrender and give it all up to God and just trust his timing, because it would have been so much easier to listen to the enemy, because that temptation was constant. I mean, that's the thing. I feel like men smell the weakness on you. They smell your desire for marriage and for love, and they play upon our weakness, I guess, at that time. And I feel like I really had to surrender to God to be able to overcome those temptations, because had I given in, I would not have the life that I have now. And I literally pinch myself. I just say my life is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, because being married and having kids is hard for sure, but it is such a huge blessing. And I think I pinch myself every day, because I'm like, I cannot believe I got to be married to the man I'm married to. I can't believe my daughters, the people that they are.
Yeah.
Because I almost didn't meet them.
Wow.
If I had made different choices, this life wouldn't exist. And that's so wild to think about. Even earlier today, it's like, I think it's Mel Robbins who says, it's like, you're always one decision away from a totally different life. And it's the absolute truth. If I had stayed in that relationship, I'd be married to him. I'd be divorced by now, I'm sure of it. I never would have met my husband. And my husband, I truly believe, is my soulmate. And, we talked really briefly beforehand. You're like, oh, is there anything that you don't want to talk on the recording? And I won't, say the whole enchilada, but I will say this. I believe my husband, my soulmate. My maiden name, Robles, is Spanish for oak tree. My husband's last name is Basque, and I'm not going to tell you it, but the way that the names interlock, I'm like, there's just no way. I feel like that's a sure sign from God. Like, this is the man that he has for me. Wow. There's so many signs that God gave me that this is the man, even though I was fearful. I didn't, when I would pray, like, Lord, is this the right man? It was constant reassurance. There was no fear in my heart. When he asked me to marry him, it was nothing but joy. Wow. And that's the thing. It's like, when my ex asked me to marry him, it was immediate fear. Wow. When my husband asked me to marry him, immediate joy. And that's the thing. It's like, if I had made different choices, if I hadn't surrendered to God, my life would be so different, and it wouldn't be what God had for me. So I think that's so, sorry, this whole email.
Do not say sorry. Please.
But it's so wild, because the temptation from the enemy is so insidious to make concessions. Yes. To just, give into your fears, just go along, just, take whoever you get. You cannot give in to fear, because it's not what God has for you. You have to be patient and wait on the Lord, because, oh my God, his plan for us is so much greater than anything we could ever imagine for ourselves. And that's the thing. It's like, we just have to be patient. It's hard. It's super hard, but so worthwhile. It's so worthwhile. So yeah, I mean, like, for the gals that ask me, how long did it take? However long it takes, girl, wait, it's worth it to do what God has for you.
Yes. Amen, sister. I'm speechless, and I have the chills. And ladies, anyone listening, like, we're not settling. We're waiting on what is of God for us, and what we deserve. And we're waiting on God's best, and we're not giving into temptation and staying in situations that aren't right for us. So, Fanneli, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm so encouraged. I'm so inspired, to be honest. Like, single life, it can be really discouraging sometimes, and maybe you go on a date that wasn't so good, and it can be hard. So this honestly really encouraged me, And I'm just really thankful for your story and what you're doing, and how you're making us feel like we're not alone, because there's so many people out there that are going through what you went through, and before
Way
we
more than you can imagine.
yes. So I appreciate you so much. And before we end, is there any like last final thing that you really want to say, or piece of advice for anyone listening?
I feel like the main thing is just, yeah, to lean into the Lord, trust in his timing. And the thing is, too, it's like, God is so good. It's not even for your best good, it's for everyone's highest good, right? So I will share that um, when I released my book, my ex's wife sent me a message on Instagram, which I did not even realize he had married because I had, zero connection with him.
Wow.
And his wife messaged me, and it was a very kind message. And essentially, she was telling me that she was so happy with him. And it's interesting to see that, like, again, like this man that was not the right match for me now is a blessing to somebody else.
Wow.
So I don't know what journey of healing he has taken to be the man that he needed to become, because this woman was, I mean, very kind, very classy when she messaged me. But again, like in a loving relationship with him, it's like God knows what he's doing. It's like we weren't giving our best to each other. We weren't a good match. I wasn't a good match for him either. I wasn't happy. And, I think he was unhappy. And the thing was, is just like, it just took one of us to have the courage to finally let go. So, I mean, yeah, you just got to trust in the Lord. And even though it's hard, you don't want to hurt other people. Ultimately, you're doing what's best for them also. Because
Yeah.
again, to me, it seems he's happily married now. And that brings me joy,
Yes. Wow. Oh, I love that. And yeah, it doesn't just impact us, or even your ex. Like, it impacts your kids. Like, this is going to be the father of your kids. This is going to be your family, like your own family, and then his family. Like, everyone's impacted by the relationship that you're in, and the best place to be is in God's will.
Yeah.
So everyone is better off when we are focused on that. So, oh gosh, I love this conversation, Fanneli, and I'm just so thankful again for you and your story, and what you're doing on social media, on your book. So where can people find you, and where can they purchase this book?
It's actually available just about everywhere now. So it's going to be on Barnes and Noble. You can order on Barnes and Noble. You can order from Amazon. Pretty much anywhere books are sold, it is available, which is great. And I actually have it for the lowest pricing on Amazon. So if you're like, hey, I want to get on Kindle, I think it's like $3 on Kindle. So it's a good buy.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely add the links below too. And do you want to say your TikTok or Instagram?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am primarily on TikTok. Girl, I'm so lazy with my Instagram. On TikTok, and I'm lazy with my Instagram too. I have like ins and outs of content production. But my handle on TikTok is anxious to write. So you can find me there. You can probably search Fanneli too. It's Fanneli. And I'm there, anxious to write.
Awesome.
On TikTok and Instagram, but I never there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Fanneli. And you heard, everyone, go follow Fanneli on TikTok. Get her book. It's awesome. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And just a reminder, make sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok. It's Samantha Venue. My links are below. And if you are on Spotify or Apple listening to Single Status Podcast, if you could write a review, rate the show, that would be so much appreciated. And we're on YouTube, so you can follow along there as well. And all right, guys, we will see you next time. Have a good day.